I mean, they're going to tell him what he wants to hear. Don't bite the hand that fingers you or something.
With this, we should move to the topic of the commissars, who
Ah,
are figures which some scholarly fellows would consider to be the immutable masters of the ship. They will
the immutable masters of the ship. So they act as bosuns to try and keep discipline aboard.
typically be found standing vigil over the lesser crewmates of the craft.
The lesser
Donned
crewmates.
in an immaculate black greatcoat lined with a fine red fabric and adorned with the cold silver skulls of the Imperium. They will truly be an iconic and hard-to-miss sight upon the deck. Hand-chosen from the most uncompromising of students from the Schola Progenium,
Alright, we
they
know
will
this
be
part.
expected to take on a multitude of roles, making them part enforcer, part intimidator, and at times as the unofficial spy masters of the ship. The assigned commissar will be accompanied
Spy master answering to who? Intimidator and enforcer, redundant?
by his own retinue of juniors who will be more than happy to weed out the weakest or borderline heretical of elements to be found amidst the expansive manifest of the crew.
Wait, commissars rooting out heresy? Isn't that the Inquisition's job?
Interestingly, they have been known to bribe vulnerable crewmates to divulge sensitive information on the craft or to point out dissident mates who will quickly be taken care of, along with the poor individual who took the bribe, ignorant to his own participation in their criminal behaviors. But the commissars will not only be deployed to deal with mutinous events, as they are to also enforce the strict standards which have upheld the Navy ever since the days of the Great Crusade. If a mate is found out of uniform, or is not giving his appropriate respects to the senior officers, then the commissar will pluck them from duty and administer a public flogging, making an example of the insolent voidfarer for all to see.
Alright, public flogging. Despite the fact that there are like, what, 10 million souls to 10,000 souls aboard these ships, killing one might actually derail the entire operation. I mean, I know there would be replacements, but it would derail. Imagine you've got 3 bunks earlier sleeping in shifts. You kill one, and the entire operation might be thrown off.
From time to time, it is to be expected for the lowly mates to occasionally fall behind in their duties. But if a commissioned officer is caught slacking, or is generally disrespecting his venerable post within the Admiralty, then the commissars will be forced to step in and show no mercy. With very little spectacle this time, they will pull the officer aside, unholster their bolt pistol, and execute the wayward noble on the spot before summoning the individual next in line to their position and ordering them to clean up the body.
That's
clearly
interesting.
as a message to dissuade them.
That discipline of these men are left to commissars and not to the actual Navy staff itself. But again, system of checks and balances. It seems like the leadership or the Admiralty can't control these nobles installing their nieces and nephews into high positions. So yeah, I guess discipline would have to fall to a different branch or division, not just the commissariat.
Them from making the same mistakes as their predecessor. Moving away from the false aristocracy of captains and commissars, let us turn our attention to the only individuals aboard the naval vessels who could be considered as true nobles, and these would be none other than of the navigators. We previously covered these mutants in a prior sermon, but in brief, they are abhumans who possess the rare gift of warp sight, meaning that they can peer into the nightmare of the immaterium.
So, abhuman. So, are they psychers or no? Can someone please put it down in the comments? Or are they like a different species of psychers? Interesting.
And chart a safe course for their ship, making them the perfect pilots for the ships of the Navy. They will be recruited from the houses of the Navis Nobilite, an ancient group which preserves the incomprehensible wealth,
Navis
power, and
Nobilite.
influence of the navigators, who have existed as a protected and independent group since long
So they only come for like from like a single clan? Ah.
before the Imperium ever first took form. Once appointed to a craft, the enigmatic psychers will be granted with their own personal chambers and will generally be
they are
afforded with
psychers.
superior luxuries comparable to the captain's, though this is more than worth it considering that none other aboard the ship could possibly attempt to replace them in their duties. Unfortunately, the rest of the crew will typically treat the navigators with a great deal of suspicion, seeing them as freaks of nature who have manipulated the trust of the High Lords and who should have otherwise been stamped out and exterminated long ago.
Almost heretical then.
Furthermore, there is an old myth which has pervaded the entirety of the Navy, stating that if one is to match the Stygian gaze of a navigator's warp eye, that something otherworldly will be sure to stare back, bearing deep into the soul of the poor fool who trusted the intolerant.
It's like in the concept of Ouija, where you basically open a doorway to another world, another dimension, or to the spiritual world. So I guess it's the same concept there, that they're basically human or living, breathing gateways to another dimension, or well, straight into the warp dimension. Okay, interesting concept. I mean, almost the same.
Mutant. This, however, is simply not true, as if one were to truly stare into the third eye of a navigator, then they would
There's a
almost
third eye.
assuredly be killed in an instant. This is because their eye exists as a direct gateway into the roiling madness of the warp.
There we
And
go.
so,
Okay.
to look within that
Same
abyssal
concept.
portal would be to expose yourself to the raw, unshielded
There's literally a doorway on their foreheads.
potential of the Immaterium, rending their feeble minds down into little more than a soup, with naught but abject terror carved into their lifeless face. Astropaths will play a similar role to the navigators in that they are also psychers, though they are tasked with listening out for the distant communiques of fellow Imperials, keeping the ship abreast of the passing events found.
So navigators, well, they navigate, and then astropaths are like the head of communication through psychic powers. Interesting. So this is how they communicate. Oh, learn something new every day.
Found out across the galaxy. They will typically form themselves into a choir so as to best amplify their psychic song, though out of the group, one will always be designated as the chief astropath, and it will fall to them to hold direct dealings with the captain. Interestingly, much of what is discussed between the captain and his chief astropath will be inherently sensitive information, and so their meetings will always take place behind closed doors.
Of course,
and away
goes
from
without
the
saying.
prying eyes of even the most trusted of advisors. As a result of this, the two will often form quite a strong bond with one another, with the psyker typically asserting himself as the captain's most trustworthy and secretive of confidants. The most junior of astropaths, however, will share in none of the glory, and rather their days will be spent in near ceaseless choir, chanting out their psychic songs to echo through the void, only to be heard if someone truly cares enough to listen. Others will quietly recite prayers or refill incense burners around their quarters. And whilst they are mostly harmless, the wider crew will hold a general disdain to their presence, seeing them in much of the same way as the navigators, in that they are foul witches who are not to be trusted. The figures we have discussed will make up less than 1% of the total.
I guess the distrust between the psychers is by design, because you know what, leadership loves an ignorant populace.
Crew manifest of an Imperial vessel, and the vast majority of the souls found upon a void ship will be of the common mates, deckhands, voidsmen, and of the indentured
Voidsmen.
servants who are ultimately responsible for maintaining and operating all functions found upon the craft. From the smallest of mercantile vessels all the way up to the largest of battleships, the common workers exist as the unheralded backbone of the Navy, ever working away in their silent, unending toil.
Good
Their
luck, buddy.
tasks are too many to list, but some will be responsible for performing painstaking maintenance work on the corroded bulkheads, whereas others will need to set out in great teams to polish the inner tubes of colossal torpedo bays.
Okay.
The crew, referred to as voidsmen, are typically those who have received some form of technical training, most often gained from their youth upon their homeworld.
Voidsmen.
Hive or Forge Worlders will be the best candidates here, as they will likely already be familiar with the concept of
Look at this artwork. Every now and then I forget that this thing has been around since the 80s.
advanced technology, as opposed to a feral worlder who may very well have never even seen a cogitator before. In any case, they will be given maintenance tasks which require a modicum of care, such as by polishing the fine collection of authentic Terran silverware, proudly owned by the captain.
Yeah.
Armsmen will be the crew who come from a military background,
Okay.
and as such, they will be equipped with weapons before being sent.
So they're the quote-unquote Marines of the ship. I mean, that is the concept of Marines, or why the Marines fall under the Navy branch, is because after the fighting is done on the water, they now have to finish it up on land. And that's where the Marines come in. But here, I wonder how they function.
Out on patrol, maintaining order and discipline throughout the ship.
Okay, more like bosun's
The lowly
mates.
shipmates will often jump at the chance of becoming an armsman, since they will have a relatively easy job, free from the hard labors of lugging around heavy machinery.
Relatively
And
easy.
yet, this task will carry with it a burden which they may never truly be able to shed. For you see, whilst out on patrol, they will often be ordered to take out their truncheons and to beat any lazy workers into submission.
There we go.
Or to
Oh,
fire
okay.
into a
So
crowd.
they're more MPs and disciplinarians. Okay, so they're not quote-unquote the Marines of the ship, but more like MPs. And they would actually patrol the ship. I remember I had an uncle who worked as a seafarer in a tanker, and one of the things they bring aboard is a bike. Because apparently one tanker is so large that you actually need a bike to get from point A to point B.
Crowd of dissidents, mowing them down just to remind them of the captain's authority.
Yeah.
Thus, it can weigh heavy on one's soul to know that they have sold out their void-faring neighbors and families just to become the weapon of tyranny which brutalizes and
So the concept is that it's a floating planet, or it's an arc, which is a world within itself, that you need a police force such as this.
terrorizes those who thought they could find freedom out in the cold expanse of the stars. The crew of an Imperial vessel who perform the most basic of functions are known as the ratings. And whilst their jobs
ratings.
may be less technical, they are by no means less valuable than of any other mate. They will pass the hours by lugging about shells, dense cables, crates of ammunition, or by simply moving the captain's furniture, a task which, if lucky, will allow them to peer out from the great windows of their chamber and stare into the dazzling vista of our galaxy. Compared to a life in the Imperial Guard, a naval rating will be relatively comfortable, with their lifespan being several times longer and their conditions often being far more favorable. A crewmate will earn a decent wage aboard their new home, and if you are lucky enough to be stationed upon a great battleship, then their outer shields will often be enough to protect you from the horrors of war. Thus, it is quite common for crewmates to volunteer themselves for service, and yet the Admiralty possesses a truly ravenous hunger for new and eager workers. Thus, if needed, a captain may set down his ship upon an imperial world and send out a press gang to round up any able-bodied citizens who will be pressed into service, whether they like it or not.
Okay.
Similarly,
So press gangs still
entire
exist.
districts of a penal colony will be emptied, with tens of thousands of hardened criminals being shackled and sent aboard, where they will be forced to scrub the decks until the end of their miserable lives. Though
End of their miserable lives. Note that there is no end of sentence, only death.
they have much to do, there are some jobs which are utterly forbidden to the lowly humans, and which can only be performed by the mechadendrite appendages of a mechanicus tech priest. We must remember that many of the ships within the Imperial Navy are ancient treasures, preserved from the dark age of technology, yet mankind no longer has the means nor blueprints to recreate such vessels from scratch.
Yeah.
As such, there can be no mistakes and no experimentation when it comes to the maintenance of relics, such as the warp drives, reactor cores,
So the Martian priests are the ones responsible for their maintenance.
or even of the colossal engine bays. Only the tech priests will carry out these duties, and they will happily hold the vessel in port for several years at a time, purely so that they can bask in the technological glory of the machine god's gift unto
Okay,
the
so
worthy
that's their
cultists
thing.
of Mars.
With regards to the Navy.
But in any case, there are many more minor roles to be played upon a ship, but they will have to wait for a future sermon. As for now, I believe that we should zoom out a little and take a closer look at the mighty ships themselves. The Imperial Navy, as we discussed, is the military branch of the Imperial fleet, but we must understand that there are a great many
Alright, so Imperial Semantics, Imperial Fleet is the entirety of all the ships. Imperial Navy is the combat or the military arm. Got it.
distinct classes of vessel which exist within its armadas that have been outfitted to serve a very specific purpose in the defense of all mankind. To expand upon a previous point on the rarity of these craft, we must first take a brief history lesson and look back through the annals of time to the forlorn golden age of humanity. It was during a time now labeled as the Dark Age of Technology.
Wait, golden age of technology equals dark age of technology. So this was when AI existed. Can someone please put it down in the comments if that's the same thing?
Where mankind arose as the dominant masters of the galaxy, producing many forbidden treasures, including sentient artificial intelligences, warp drives, and standard template constructs. But alongside such relics were their tools of war, and given that we had ascended as a spacefaring civilization, many of these advancements were related to starships and voidcraft. Colossal battleships, the likes of
Starships and void crafts. So I guess they're not relatively exclusive, but what was the point? I mean, how did it all fall? I guess we have to tackle that particular topic one of these days.
of which our species had never before seen, were erected en masse and launched out of system-spanning shipyards to be accompanied by an auxiliary armada of support vessels, each works of art in their own right. But with the onset of the AI rebellions and with the chaos brought about by the long night, our ancestors
So AI rebellions and the long night. Yeah, we definitely have to tackle these topics in the future.
lost the schematics and methods needed for constructing such crafts, meaning that as each one was destroyed, that it was to be forever lost to the cold immensity of the void.
The cold immensity of the
Those
void.
which survived into the age of the Imperium were to be preserved as the most precious of humanity's old treasures. And it has now ultimately fallen to the Mechanicus to maintain the arcane workings of each ship, even if they themselves are befuddled by the impossible machinery. They cannot even take the risk of disassembling some of the rare components, as if it becomes damaged, then the vessel may be rendered functionally useless.
So, I guess their solution is to literally pray at it or just, stare at it in awe.
Thus, much of their maintenance work is more spiritual,
There we go.
with the priests wafting oily incense and chanting out canticles of holy binary in order to soothe the fabled spirits within. With that said, it tends to only be the largest or most advanced of void ships which fall under this ancient category, and in fact, the many dockyards of the Mechanicus are still able to produce an impressive selection of the ships commonly found
So
within the
all
Navy.
hope is not lost?
This makes a
Or
lot
not
of sense.
not all hope is
For
lost.
the Imperium cannot reliably defend itself only with their limited stock of irreplaceable crafts, and so the rare treasures of the Dark Age will only make up a limited portion of the vessels found within a battle fleet. But they tend to be the largest and most powerful of craft
Look
available
at
to the Imperium.
that thing.
And so rather than being used as any other vessel, they will be hand-chosen to serve as the flagships for Lord Admirals, or to be the mobile fortress monasteries
Fortress
for
monasteries.
fleet-based chapters of the Space Marines. As an example of this, let us look upon one of the rarest of patterns, found in the Gloriana class of battleship. Around the time of the Great Crusade, there were roughly 20 of these behemoths ships found scattered out through the galaxy.
There was
And
20
as
of
each
them,
one
and now
was
what?
recovered, the Emperor gifted them to his sons, with the intent on them serving as the flagships for each of his legions. Some were later destroyed during the chaos of the Horus heresy, or were captured and claimed by rival legions.
So there's a parallel, just like in Games of Thrones and House of the Dragon. They had multitudes of dragons, but thanks to the war, what? None of them survived, or at least in this particular case, only a handful of them survived.
But as it so stands today, they are incredibly rare, and they will only be found within an
There we
engagement
go.
if the ruling admirals
Just a
believe
handful
that
now.
their strength will provide the only possible route to victory. Returning to the wider fleet, however, we must consider that the size of the naval ships will vary wildly, ranging from these colossal crafts being crewed by up to 1 million souls, all the way down to tiny single-manned fighters deployed out as a great field to swarm and harass larger vessels. In terms of the absolute largest of spacefaring craft controlled by the Navy, it would likely fall to the Ramil's class of Star Fort,
Ramil's
which
class.
are semi-stationary stellar fortresses that can move via warp travel to be relocated to wherever is in dire need of defense.
Oh,
But I personally wouldn't count these as ships, and so instead the largest vessel in the history of the Navy would be the Abyss class of
Abyss
battleship,
class.
dwarfing the Great Gloriana class in their size, and being comparable in scale to the Imperial Fist's Fortress of the Phalanx. There were only ever 3 of these produced, and each of them was used by the word-bearers during the Great Crusade, though with their fall to heresy, one was destroyed, and the remaining 2 have gone missing,
Such a waste.
likely lost within the chaos of the Eye of Terror.
What happened to the inhabitants?
Both the Abyss and Gloriana class were confined to the armadas of the Astartes. But for the Imperial Navy, we could perhaps claim that the largest ship found in their modern-day fleets would be of the Apocalypse class of battleship. These are also relics of the Dark Age of technology, and we will only find a scant few within the battle fleets of each segmentum, yet their presence will most assuredly turn the tides of battle, perhaps only requiring a single shot from their ancient Nova cannon.
What's a Nova cannon? And what exactly serves as its ammunition? I mean, ancient Nova cannon, the problem is ammunition. With any armament, when or where are you going to find the ammunition for it? Anyways.
This weapon lives up to the ship's namesake as apocalyptic in that it will fire its gigantic projectiles
Broadside?
at relativistic speeds, meaning that they travel close to the speed of light, all but assuring that its targets will be utterly obliterated by even a glancing strike. The recoil produced from such a shot can only be compensated by setting the battleship's rear engines to full thrust, and we can imagine that if this cannon was fitted onto a smaller craft,
The recoil.
that it may be entirely torn apart just from the force of firing the weapon. In any case, the actual projectile can vary between cannons, often being armed at the behest of the presiding captain. Some will be fitted to fire out plasma bursts, burning with the intensity of a newborn star, whereas others will contain experimental gravity-based explosives, though it can be quite tricky to time the detonation when the warhead is set to be fired at near light speed.
So just like
Regardless of the
subs.
round, Nova cannons have been known to utterly destroy enemy battleships of a greater size than of the Apocalypse class from but a single shot, with the ruined husk of the vessel being torn apart and cast out into the void at unimaginable speeds. As a special note, I will mention the ship class known as the Universe Mass Conveyor, which is around 12 kilometers long.
Jesus.
And in addition to its normal crew manifest, it can carry around 500,000 passengers, making it the vessel of choice for transporting the armies.
I wonder how the toilet situation works. I mean, the logistics alone for their food for 500,000 people apart from the crew.
Of the Imperial Guard. The cultists of Mars, however, hold their largest ships as the Arc Mechanicus, which are primarily used by obsessive explorators who wish to uncover the many technological secrets of the galaxy. The Speranza is one such vessel which, according to legend, harbors a sentient machine spirit, a damaged STC database.
So, I think we talked about this before. Machine spirit equals surviving AI. Anyways, can someone again please put it down in the comments because it's been some time since we talked about it and I already forgot. My bad.
And a weapon which can be used to fire black holes to send its targets back through time.
Whoa.
Moving down in scale, we will find the grand cruisers of the Imperium, which are heavily reinforced craft built to around 7.5 kilometers in length that exist to unleash salvos in a far closer range than of the battleships. With their prodigious size and crew count climbing into the hundreds of thousands, they are still mighty vessels which could very well eclipse the flagships of many alien species.
They don't have what we
who will
got.
scarcely comprehend that a ship of this scale will be risked during close engagements. Further down,
Wait, I wonder if we're gonna talk about the fighter pilots.
we reach the cruisers, which can be subdivided between the heavy and light variants. They will typically make up the backbone of a naval fleet, being multi-purpose vessels that can be outfitted in a wide range of classes to specialize an armada to the exact demands of the ruling admiral. The most common type of ship to be found, however, will be the destroyers. Sometimes named as frigates or escorts, they will number in the dozens, sometimes even hundreds for the largest of battle fleets, and their role will be to defend the larger, more valuable ships by harassing the most dangerous vessels the enemy has at their disposal. They're also typically sent out on reconnaissance.
So, hammer and anvil strategy, I guess they run it towards the bigger vessels. Is that how it works? Is that how the formation works? Can someone please put it down in the comments?
Missions, scouting out ahead of the main fleet to uncover hidden dangers or to simply defend a small convoy as it passes through hostile territory. At the smallest scale, we have the attack craft, some of which will only be controlled by a single pilot. They will be unleashed in great squadrons, often used to defend larger vessels from enemy bombing runs, or to perform daring sorties against the most vulnerable points of an enemy fleet. There are many more classes and subclasses of ship to mention, but our selection has covered the most common vessels to be found in the Imperial armadas. For now, however, let us return to the grimy decks and learn a little more about the typical scenarios
Grimy decks.
which a crew may be forced to face whilst out on patrol in the lightless abyss.
Thank you for watching, guys. Now, if you want me to check out other stories here on YouTube, please let me know in the comments. We upload every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 12 p.m. Eastern Standard. Please like, share, subscribe, do the whole notification button thing to help me out with the algo. And don't forget to check out our Twitch channel where you can catch me do this live. Now, class dismissed.